Here.
Let's do it.
So Danielle, you want to do a quick introduction and we'll get started?
Sure, happy to. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you today. We've got, triple digits for our webinar registration. We're really excited to have such a huge crowd from our customer base today. And, we have Rich Severson, our VP of Solutions Engineering with us, and he is the ultimate expert. So we're so lucky to have him take us through really like once you get set up with Stratodesk, what are some of the features and capabilities that you can optimize so you can get even more out of Notouch Center. So Rich is going to be taking us through that today. We will be answering questions throughout, so feel free to put things into the Q&A or the chat. We'll do our best to answer them as they come up. We are recording. We'll make sure that you get a recording afterwards, especially if there's someone on your team you think would benefit from this. But other than that, I think we're good to go, Rich.
All right. Well, Danielle, thank you. And kind of like Danielle said, this is one of those things that's going to be a series of webinars that we're going to do, because what we want to do is we want to provide information for the system administrators and Notouch Center administrators. Think about the things that you do or would like to be able to do beyond once you initially get set up. So today we're just going to cover some of the simple things that might be, if you will, think of it as the next steps beyond, hey, I've got my devices connected. I've got a connection to my VDI session. What are the things that I need to know next, or things that I can do to make my, excuse me, my end user's experience or my experience a little bit better? So again, we've only got 30 minutes, so we'd like some input. So along the way, guys, if there's things that you'd like to see in the future, make sure you put those in the chat. Danielle will capture those, and then we'll do more of these going forward. So today, just a couple of things that I'm going to cover. First of all, as you can see, right, I'm using, currently I'm using an instance that's here in the office, and I'm connected to the virtual appliance side, because there's some things that I wanted to cover here just to make sure that everybody's aware of them, the things that people don't necessarily think about or, have questions about after they get through the initial deployment. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we cover, right, is how do you get a backup of Notouch Center or your Notouch Center appliance? So obviously, if you log into the virtual appliance admin side, so you can go to your tcmgr.mycompany or whatever the URL is for your Notouch Center, and then go to VA admin, or you can also get here from the main landing screen, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But obviously, then there's an icon you can click on and select, and that will actually create a backup of your appliance. That way you'll have it. That way, if you do need to be able to do a restore for whatever reason, you'll be able to do that. It's important to note that the backup will capture everything regarding the database, the configuration settings, including your licenses. So that way, if you ever need to be able to reload your licenses, you'll be able to do that, okay? So another thing that I like to point out to people is a lot of times when people are looking at their Notouch Center logs, in Notouch Center, everybody knows kind of what I'm talking about up in the upper right corner of the log. You'll notice a lot of times that if you haven't changed it, the times of the logging events are based on UTC. So people want to be able to go in and change the time zone setting for their virtual appliance. That way they can look at the logs, and that way the time for the logging is relative to you, to where you're at for your system administration. The other thing that I wanted to point out here, and this is for people that may have distributed environments, and that is replication, because this is one of those things that people don't necessarily know about or aren't aware of. So think of if you've got an environment where I've got main office A, and I've got, let's say 500 devices in main office A, and then I may have another 500 devices in main office B. Well, when I go to do firmware updates for those devices that are in main office B, do I really want to pull the entire image all the way across the network every time that I want to do an update on the OS? So what you can do is you can actually stand up another instance of the appliance over in main office B or office B, and you can turn off the front end service. So you're not going to use Notouch Center, and you can configure that as a replication server. And what that will do is that will allow you to replicate anything that's in the file store or the image management for Notouch Center out to that replicant virtual appliance, so that then you can use that for when you're updating the image on those remote devices. you can tell those devices to use an alternate firmware URL, being the appliance that's at that other location, and that way they will pull the firmware packages locally to them. It'll save you a lot of bandwidth, and obviously it makes the updates proceed much faster. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we point out. So those are the kind of the key things regarding the virtual appliance, as well as, you know, if you are configuring or setting up a cloud extension, obviously this is where you'd set cloud extension. One thing to note, do not on your primary Notouch Center toggle this into on and hit save, because that'll obviously turn off the Notouch Center interface. But this is how you set up cloud extension. You'd obviously you would toggle this to on, and you would copy the SSH key from your primary Notouch Center. And I'll show you where that key is located in just a moment. So if there's not any more questions about the virtual appliance, what we're going to do, and actually I just thought of one thing. Don't forget, the Notouch Center does include a Pixie server. So if you wanted to be able to update or image your devices via Pixie, this is where you configure the Pixie server for Notouch Center. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump over to the Notouch Center interface. And remember, I told you that you can get there either, you know, typing your URL or via admin. This link here also takes you over to the virtual appliance. Okay. So just so everybody knows. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to log into Notouch Center. And like I said, this is a relatively short time period, and as long as the demo gods work for me today, I can't even get signed in. We'll be able to go through just a couple of things that I think are important. So, you know, ideally, you've already got your environment set up, and you see here I've got quite a few devices in configuration settings, but I wanted to be able to point out things in here. So one of the things that as an admin that may make your life a little bit easier, that's kind of one of those semi-advanced principles that a lot of people don't use, is this item called static profiles. And think of static profiles as a reusable bucket of settings, or something that you may want to be able to use or apply on the fly. As example here, this is one that we came up with working with a customer a little bit ago, is think about, you know, how many times are you working with a remote device and you need to get a console session on that device so you can run some commands or look at some different information. And this is one, and I'll walk through this a little bit slow because some of you probably want to grab a screenshot of this. And of course, we'll have this anyways. But so what I've done is I've gone in and I've clicked on the plus sign to create a new static profile. And I've named that static profile terminal for debugging. And you can add any parameters or settings in here that you might want to add, such as turning on SSH or something like that, right? But in this case, what I've done is I've created a debugging command or connection, right? And I've called it debugging. And I went in and I'm going to say that we're going to do it as a custom command. And we'll select custom command. And then that custom command that we're going to push is this command right here, okay? And then ideally what we're going to do is we're going to add a custom icon for that as well. So now I have that command available to me so that I can push that command over to a device at any point. So now we'll come back to that in just a few minutes, right? So we've got the ability to create a static profile. And we'll take that a little bit further. For my lab, here I've got the option to press a connection for Chromium, and it's telling it to go to my Notouch Center. So you can add multiple different static profiles and create those and then be able to push those out to either devices or groups of devices on the fly. As example, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the group called Office Devices, and I'm going to go to this device specifically. And then I'm going to say, I want to add that icon, right? Console for debugging. So now I simply go up to say static profile, and I select terminal for debugging, click add, and then announce that device. So I'm going to go to actions, announce, and tell that device that I just made a change and I want to get that configuration. So now ideally that device is suddenly going to have an icon show up on it. It gives me the ability to do that. So while we're talking about icons, I want to talk a little bit about how the icons appear on the devices and how you might be able to modify those devices or those icons. So by default, the icons are created on the desktop in the order of which you create them. So if I were to shadow one of my devices right now, in theory, the connections on the desktop would appear as Chromium, AVD, and CTX, which may be fine, or you may just want one different icon. but you have the ability within those connections to create custom icons. And so what I'm going to do is real quick is I'm going to do Control F, right? Because remember, Notouch Center is a web interface and it gives you the ability to find things. And I'm going to search for icon. And down here, this is where you can choose the icon mode, right? And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that you can choose favicon. And what favicon is favicon is these little icons that show up on the tabs for your different devices. So let's say that you're creating a browser connection to Salesforce. That's something that everybody knows, right? So you could create a browser connection to Salesforce and you would choose it to use favicon. And by doing that, the icon that shows up on the desktop for the user, instead of being the Chromium icon, will be the icon for Salesforce. Okay. Now, another thing that you can do, and you, by the way, you may want to do that, like let's say that you're using Citrix to connect to Epic, right? Instead of having the default connection for Citrix, you could change that icon to be a custom icon, and you could say icon uploaded, and you could upload the icon for Epic. And obviously what you do is you'd go to resources and you'd go to miscellaneous files and you upload the icon for Epic, and then you'd be able to assign that icon to that connection. And that way to the user, instead of their desktop just looking like a Citrix connection, it would look like the Epic icon. So that may be something that's more favorable to them or easier for them to understand. And certainly in those instances where you have multiple Citrix connections or multiple VMware connections, by doing the custom icons, you can make it look like the application that the users are going to actually use, rather than having multiple connections that just simply look like Citrix. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do with these, if you want to reorder these, right? So you've got Citrix, you got AVD, and again, they should show up on the desktop in this order: Chromium, AVD, Citrix. If you wanted to reorder those icons, in fact, let's do it. In this case, we're going to go to this one, and I'm going to go to Extended, and I think I may have already changed this one. I didn't. So on the connection, under Extended, you'll see this value called icon sort key. And by default, the icon sort key for each connection is 100. And you can change that value to reorder the positioning of the icons on the desktop. So again, with the icon default value being 100, if I change this to any value less than 100, right? So it's a earlier value, I guess, if you will, that will rearrange the icon to be on top of anything that has an icon sort value of 100. So it will change the position of that icon, okay? So let's go, I'm gonna make sure that we actually save that. We did, okay? We're gonna go to that device. We'll announce those changes, say announce, send that out, and we'll give that device a moment to get that announcement, and then we'll go ahead and shadow that. So as you can see, these are the kinds of things that we want to do in these types of seminars that are, what are the next steps, right? What can I do next to make my user or my experience with NoTouch better? Are there different things, custom commands, how to use those things, what are they? And of course, obviously, a lot of this information is at our KB site at kb.stratodesk.com, but it's key to know that this stuff is here. Is there, somebody just asked a question from the audience, is there a way to quickly filter for firmware version or other unique field? I want to make sure they understand. Let's see, hint, firmware can be done, resources, media, images. Oh, okay. Yeah, so you can, obviously you can look at info for groups of devices and see the different versions. Hi, do you have a guide that describes the parameters at the open fields and options of the closed ones? Seth, I'm not sure if I understand the question. It's important to know with Notouch Center, right? We set the default configuration parameters for you. As example here, central management is on by default. Therefore, you do not need to select or toggle that for Notouch or for central management to be enabled. Okay. It's also important to note with the configuration parameters, again, let's go to the group level. So I'm at the group level of devices, group settings. And if I go to the Chromium connection, you'll see that it's checked here because it's set at this level. Okay. But what I put in the open text fields. What you put in the open text fields is going to be dependent on what the parameter is that you're using. Obviously, username, you put in the username if you're going to be pressing the username over. So many of these fields will have different parameters depending on what the field is doing. Hopefully that helps. So let's go ahead and do the magic. Let's see if we can shadow this device and see if the demo gods are working for me today. And hopefully if it is, then we should see everything that we pushed over to that device. And of course, I get the web interface, but let's go ahead and shadow it anyways. Shadow. And so now we'll have the ability to see the icons. And of course, this device has not updated. So, but the devices will get their update and when they do an announce cycle, and that information will show up and we'll be able to look at that. Okay. So again, there's different ways, different things, different parameters that you can assign to things to be able to modify the behavior of your devices and the look and feel. So Daniel sent to SF that we'll connect to him afterwards to address that. So,
And then we have one more in our Q&A as well.
okay. Did I miss it? Let's see if you guide. I'm not seeing it, Daniel. Did I miss?
I think it's in the actual Q&A box. I can read it if not.
Yeah, if you would, please.
Sure. Okay. Say I've got a device in a group with group settings, but I've gone into the individual devices settings and overridden some of the group settings or customized some other settings. What's the best way to get that device's settings reverted back to only the settings set at the group level?
Okay, so that's actually a really good question. And it's important to remember that you can do this at any level, meaning I can do this at the device level or I can do it at the group level. What you can do, in this case, you asked about if you'd set settings at a specific device and you wanted to revert them. What you can do is you can select the device and you can go to changed and you'll be able to see what has been changed and where that's been changed from. And meaning, has it been set at the device or has it been set via inheritance? You can also look at non-default and see additional settings too. So in this case, looking at this device, I'm looking at non-default. So anything that's on this device that is not default, I can see, has it been set at the device? Because obviously there's a check mark at the device level, or is it coming through inheritance? And we show you where the inheritance is coming from, okay? So then obviously if I wanted to undo anything at the device level, I could simply uncheck these check boxes and that parameter would then go away, or those parameters would go away, okay? Hopefully that helps. Any additional questions?
And then, yep, we do have one more in the chat.
Can you explain why you have both checkboxes and toggles? Something turned on if the toggle is on but not checked. It depends on the parameter. As example, we'll use this one here. Okay, you see we've got SSH start service. That service is on, and we're indicating that the service is set to on, but there is no check mark here. And the reason there's no check mark is because that service being set to on is being inherited from the office or the device, or the group level settings. So example, if we look at SSH service on, again, it's on, we're showing that it is on, and then it's being inherited, and it's being inherited from the group level. So we'll go to the group level and go to group settings and go to services, SSH, and you're going to see that it's set to on. We've toggled it on. Oh, it just jumped down. It's set here, and that's why the check marks are here and not at the device level. Does that answer that question? So again, if there is a check mark, that means it's set at that level. If it's on, in this case, like here you see parameter macro extension, it's already on. You do not need to set a check mark there on that one because we've set it to on by default for you. Okay. So if it's on by default, and there's no need to put a check mark there. Any additional questions? Gone through this pretty quick. Like I said, this is one of those things that we plan on doing more of these, and we'll go through, you know, more detail of the different objects and such. So we would certainly like input on, you know, different subjects, different things that people would like to see. I mean, the advantage of NoTouch is obviously there's a lot of things we can do with it. Now, and all of those things tend to be unique per customer depending on what they're trying to do, you know, as far as the different settings. So we like to be able to cover different subjects for different groups. So if there's a subject that you'd like to see later on, maybe Pixie, maybe RBAC, the rules-based access controls, and you mentioned that. Let's look at that real quick. I'm not going to go into the details of rules-based access controls, but you do have the ability to create different roles in different users, meaning you can add different users, you can add system admins, you can add tech support groups, and then within those roles, you can give them different permissions and capabilities. Meaning, do they have the ability to shadow all the devices? Do they have the ability to reboot? Do they have the ability to make changes? You have the ability to filter through these and give these different levels of roles-based access controls so that you could set it up. So I could say, hey, I want to give Danielle the ability to log into Notouch Center, see the devices, shadow the devices, and reboot the devices. And that's all I want to be able to give her the ability to do. And you can do that using the rules-based access controls. Okay.
Thanks, Rich. We do have 2 additional questions.
Okay.
They're in the Q&A again.
Let me see if okay, I got to bring up the Q&A window so I can see that. Okay. So Kyle asked, are there any plans to integrate with Microsoft Intune? So we have actually, we're in process of taking a look at that. Is it something that would be beneficial? What are the advantages, disadvantages of doing it? And you know, certainly as you would imagine, that Intune can be a complex thing. It's something that we're looking into, so I would say stay tuned, okay? Because you may see the ability to integrate no-touch devices with Intune soon, okay? Really struggling with on-prem server 22, Hyper-V, RDS, VDI, and Azure MFA. Anybody successfully get it? So, so I'm guessing you're trying to integrate your on-prem RDS servers with Azure MFA. That's probably nothing we can help with here. But certainly, you know, when you're talking about Azure AD and Azure authentication, it can get complex, certainly when you're integrating on-prem stuff. Let's see. Sarah added the ability to do Pixie boot, how to do mass reboots, choose endpoints. So when it comes to reboots, there is a service, and again, you can do this at the group level or at the individual device level. If you go into services, and again, we'll do the Control F and search reboot. And that's where you'll find the reboot service. And then this gives you a lot of configuration options regarding the reboot service. It is important to know that once you start the reboot service, it does require a reboot for the reboot service to take effect. And then certainly once you've got the reboot service done, you can set up cron jobs or cron scheduling to reboot either that device or those groups of devices. Okay. Is there a way to bulk reboot multiple systems? Certainly you can select an individual device and do actions or reboot. And obviously you can also do that at the group level. You can certainly go to select a group and say actions and reboot. You can reboot the devices. You can actually get really creative with the cron service for reboot. I know that there are individuals that have created cron jobs to enumerate the MAC addresses of the devices to say, I want to reboot every device that ends in an odd MAC address on Mondays and every device that ends with an even MAC address on Tuesdays. But again, that would get into the cron scheduling, right? So which is the best to enact, change, announcing, or rebooting? How long is expected to wait? So when you right click on those devices and take these actions, you can do it obviously from the right click flyout menu. And they should happen relatively quickly. It's going to be dependent on certainly the bandwidth and the latency to the devices, as well as what the system is doing. Meaning if you've got 10,000 or 15,000 devices and you right click and say reboot, that task is going to go into the system, and it may take a minute or two to process that depending on what the system may be doing. Okay.
Thanks, Rich. And then we do have more that are in the chat. Thanks, everyone. We love the questions. It's great.
Let's see. Everything related to Microsoft is overly complex. Yes, no, but any plans to support Windows 365 boot on thin clients? It's funny that you asked that, because 365 boot is actually something that they created for Windows. And we've looked at, would there be a way to include that in NoTouch OS that would make sense? And realistically, you could create a AVD connection on NoTouch OS and put that AVD connection into kiosk mode, right, to automatically start on system boot. And it effectively will do basically the same thing that 365 boot does. And Sarah, I just saw yours. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's see. Hopefully everybody else can see the chat too. Is there a way to integrate Microsoft certificate server to sign in the entire fleet with an internal trusted certificate? Can updates of certificates be automated? So if I understand it correctly, the question you're asking about how to include the Microsoft certificates onto a NoTouch OS device. And it's important to remember that with NoTouch, we do include SCEP, or the CertMonger service. Also, and it's been a while since I used it, so I can't speak on it really clearly here. But if you create a connection and go to connection mode and select Active Directory, the Active Directory connection type is designed such that a NoTouch OS device can hit AD and get a certificate. Okay, so that's a little complex, but I think certainly if you have any questions about it, you may want to send a ticket to the support desk, and hopefully they'll be able to give you the guidance about that, and hopefully that'll help. We're at time, but I'm going to go through a couple more. Let's see. Can the recording be sent? I believe Danielle's going to send the recording out. Do you have a power option to put the device to sleep shut down after a while? I don't know off the top of my head, but I would imagine you probably could certainly run a custom command, if nothing else, that says if the device has been idle for a period of time, execute a shutdown. But certainly the disadvantage of shutting down a device is then obviously NoTouch can't reach it, right? So then you would have to be able to use Wake on LAN to be able to get to the device. And then Sarah asked, example, 100 devices in profile, but want to reboot only 30 of them. Are you saying I have to have the individually reboot each one? I don't know. There's probably ways to enumerate different groups, and or could you possibly create different subgroups for those 30 devices? So meaning you'd have devices under Office devices, and then create reboot group 1, reboot group 2, etc. So they would still all have the same configuration parameters. They would just have a different reboot cron schedule. So that may be one way to do it. But certainly, Sarah, we can have, either myself or Paul can reach out to you and we can work through that. Is there, Eric, thank you very much. Is there a way to determine how many devices have a specific static profile attached? And actually there is I'm just not going to fumble my way through it right here on the webinar, Eric, but yeah, there is a way to do it. It's going to be, you'll go to the group, and I believe it's going to be under info. And then once you get to the group info, you'll be able to select the different parameters on what's been assigned, but we can go through that. So, okay. So with that, everybody, we're at time, and a little bit over actually. And so I want to say thank you everybody for joining. And again, please put some information and provide the feedback on what additional subjects you'd like to see in the future. Because again, we want to continue these series. Again, the Stratodesk Next Steps. So thank you everybody for joining. And Danielle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who is here asking questions. It's really great to see all of your questions and thoughts. A lot of you are helping answer as well. So we're so happy to have so many experts in the audience as well. For anyone that is not a customer, we're happy to set you up with a free trial. We'll include a link as well as a recording afterwards. We'll send that out. And then we will do our best to follow up with any additional questions that we maybe didn't answer completely. But if we, somehow miss you, please reach out to us. You can do that through our website. We have, you can open up a support ticket. There's lots of ways. But we would love to connect with you. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks, everybody.